Hello, my fellow project managers. How you doing? Welcome to Unraveling the PMP Exam. There are lots of courses out there, but there are very few that actually cover mindset, expectations, and ideas. So I would highly recommend that you bookmark this so that before your exam, you continually listen to it over and over again. I'm going to unpack so much stuff that you're probably going to have to listen to this 3 or 4 times. So I'm going to cover the mindset, the expectations, and ideas. So here's the overarching grand mindset. The overarching grand mindset is that the PMI wants you to exemplify servant leadership in the answers. The PMI wants you to show agility in the answers. And the PMI also wants you to put the team first. Team autonomy, team trust is big. And I'm going to cover other ideas with you. But let's jump straight into the first domain, which is the people domain. Now, in all honesty, a lot of people say that this domain is easier than the others. But it doesn't follow. Some people do well on the process domain and may not do well on the people domain. It really depends. So I don't want you to take it for granted that you know everything in the people domain. So let me unpack this very quickly. The exam is going to test you on internal people and external people. You got to understand the individuals within the organization where the project has been executed. Those are internal people, right? You have internal stakeholders, but you also have external people, external stakeholders. These are individuals or entities outside the organization who are involved in the project in some capacity. These could be people working directly on the project, but they're external. These could be people who are vendors, suppliers, who you have contracted to work for some hours on the project and so on. So your exam is going to test you on these 2 categories. When it comes to internal stakeholders, we could break this down into executives, senior management, the project sponsor, the project manager, project team, functional managers. When it comes to external stakeholders, we're referring to the customer, the client, end users, regulators, suppliers, vendors, and we could even throw in the general public, because depending on the project you're working on, the general public could be a stakeholder. And in that case, you need to satisfy their interest as well. So we have these 2 broad categories and buckets, but your exam is going to give you questions about what should the project manager do next in each situation. We talk about project team members. These are people directly involved in executing the task. You'll have a lot of questions about these people. Team members in the world of Agile, we could call them developers. You'd have subject matter experts, consultants, and so on. Vendors and suppliers, these are external entities contracted to provide goods and services. We have suppliers, we have service providers. Like I said, sometimes they could actually be writing code or working directly on the project tasks. Now, here's the domain mindset for the people piece. Communications is big. You're going to have a lot of communication questions wrapped into other domains as well, right? So you could have communication that is tied to, let's say, schedule, or communication that's tied to stakeholder, or communication that's tied to scope. In fact, you will not have a communications question that is not tied to some stakeholder. So it's big. Your project team, for example, consists of remote members from different time zones. You notice that crucial project updates are not reaching everyone on time, leading to misunderstandings and delays. What should the project manager do next? This is a typical question. It's a classic one. You are always going to have the what should the project manager do next. I want to say about 90 to 95% of your exam is going to be like this. So in order to do well in communications, you need to know types of communications, communication channels, communication models, communication methods, and technologies. Going into team building, a scenario: 2 team members are constantly clashing, affecting team morale and productivity. Despite attempts to address the issue, the conflict persists. What should the project manager do next? Classic one from the world of the PMI. Sometimes the question may not be as stern in that direction, but you could have questions that actually test your understanding of your role. Do you know that you need to get in the way of that conflict and do something about it? All right, so you don't want to be docile in these answers. Once you have the mindset, you will know what to do, because the options that make you docile, or the mother may I project manager that goes asking senior management to resolve it, that's the wrong option. So here we're talking about team development, the 5 stages of team development: Tuckman's ladder, forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning, team roles, team dynamics, team contract, social contract, ground rules, team agreement. All that stuff is all here. To be a good leader, you want to make sure you have a team agreement, same thing as a team charter, team contract, social contract, which contains ground rules. Then you have team performance. Here's a scenario: one of your team members consistently delivers high quality work and goes above and beyond expectations. However, other team members feel demotivated and undervalued. What should the project manager do next to address this situation? So here, this is where you will be tested in team building, in creating a positive environment for the team. And you will have a lot of questions that test your understanding of your role as a leader, not as, in quote, the project manager doing all the management kind of stuff. No, you're also responsible for the leadership piece. So performance appraisals, team member motivation techniques, team member recognition and rewards, team member training and development. The best answer is the one that takes the team from zero to feeling like they're the hero. Then we have conflict management. Here's a scenario. Two departments involved in the project have conflicting priorities, resulting in delays and misunderstandings. Attempts to resolve the conflict have been unsuccessful. What should the project manager do next to manage this conflict? Again, it is going to push you to the limit and see if you will truly take action, or if you will roll over and be docile, or if you will say, "Mother, may I." So you have to get your wits about you as far as, I need to take action to move things in the right direction to resolve. Okay? Don't ignore it. We have types of conflict, some functional, dysfunctional at a high level, but you also need to know the different flavors of conflict resolution, right? Collaborate, compromise, avoid, accommodate, force in, all that stuff. That whole conflict mode instrument, make sure you know it down pat, because they may not use the word compromise or reconcile, force or direct, but they will dress up the scenario around these options, and you need to know which one is best. Okay? Conflict escalation, de-escalation techniques, negotiation techniques, and stuff like that. Again, they may not spell out the words avoid or withdraw, smooth or accommodate. Then we go into leadership. Everything rises and falls on leadership. So this is a key aspect of your test. Whether you're in the world of agile, you're in the world of predictive, hybrid, you will get questions on leadership. Your team is facing a tight deadline and tensions are running high. As project manager, you notice team members are becoming increasingly stressed and overwhelmed. What leadership approach should the project manager adopt to address this situation? You've got authoritarian, you've got democratic, you've got laissez-faire, but you also need to remember the Hersey-Blanchard model, situational. Also remember, EI is big. Understand that not everyone likes to bask in the limelight. Power and influence, all of these are concepts you could get on the exam. Stakeholder management. I like thinking of stakeholders as stakeholders needing to be engaged. The word management is a little bit lofty, and that's why PMI says manage stakeholder engagement, not manage stakeholder. So a scenario is a key stakeholder expresses dissatisfaction with the project's progress during a stakeholder meeting, citing lack of communication and transparency. What should the project manager do next to manage the stakeholder's concern? Classic from the exam. And you need to make sure you resolve, or at least you move the situation in the right direction, which is forward. Saying no or the mother may I is very common. Don't fall into those traps. Stakeholder identification and analysis is big. Stakeholder engagement strategies, stakeholder communication planning, influence and impact assessment, consideration of vendors, suppliers, and the general public as stakeholders is also very important. Let's move on to the process domain. Process domain is where a lot of people say they had difficulty, but you need to think about this in the knowledge areas and make sure you've accounted for each one. Integration. Your project has reached a critical milestone, but stakeholders, key stakeholders, have conflicting expectations about the deliverables. What should the project manager do next? So again, you got to reset your mind into anything can happen at any phase. Bringing everything together is integration. So you need to understand your charter, your project plan, change control. That's like the bread and butter of integration. And then on top of that, got to understand reporting and final reporting. Scope management. Midway through the project, additional requirements emerge from stakeholders that were not initially identified. What should the project manager have done first to prevent this situation? This is a trick question because these requirements emerging, you could look at this as being a bad thing if you want to label it scope creep. But what if you're in the world of agile? Is that a bad thing? If the customer says this will give us additional value, can we have it? Is that bad? So you need to have a mindset that is both agile, predictive, in other words, hybrid, depending on the scenario painted. So be on the alert. I've heard from so many people that the exam is riddled with hybrid. In fact, a lot of people say that exam has got to have been 60% hybrid, 30% agile, and 10% predictive. I've heard that so many times. So be ready for that. Schedule management. The project is falling behind schedule due to unexpected delays in obtaining necessary approvals. What should the project manager do next to mitigate the impact on the timeline? You got to read each word carefully. Mitigate is a reduction, okay? Impact on the timeline, talking about the time that was meant to be taken on the project. So schedule development, schedule control, schedule compression, critical path method. When you break it down, you have either planning or monitoring and controlling. It's funny that schedule is either black or white. You're either planning or you're monitoring and controlling. And that's one easy way to look at schedule and scope. Same thing with cost. You're either planning or you're monitoring and controlling. Scenario. The project expenditures are exceeding the planned budget due to unforeseen expenses. What should the project manager do next to address this cost overrun? You got cost estimating, cost budgeting, cost control, and the topic of EVM, which, to be quite honest, on the exam has been watered down. It's not as prominent as it used to be. So as long as you understand the core idea around earned value, you should be golden. Quality management. Quality audits reveal recurring defects in the deliverables affecting customer satisfaction. What preventive action should the project manager have implemented to avoid this issue? Classic one in the book. What should the project manager have done? What should the project manager do now? What should the project manager do first? All of these are possible scenario questions. I really want to get it down, my friends, into your subconscious mind that you will not have those ITTO questions like before. Some of you have taken the exam in the past and you're scared, oh, I got to cram all these ITTOs. No, you do not need to cram them. Methods, models, and artifacts don't need to be crammed. You need to understand what they are, what they do, but spend your time on mastering scenario thinking. I often say on this exam, you need to have some tricks in your gig bag. And one of the tricks I recommend is the DIGCIV approach, DIGCIV. What do I mean by that? Always define what the problem is in any question and identify the root cause from the information given. Then in your head, generate alternatives. Also compare those to the question alternatives and choose the best alternative. Now, in your mind's eye, implement that, hypothetically speaking, and ask, if that happened in the real world, would that really solve the problem? And have a double check, but don't second guess. A double check is different from a second guess. So this needs to be your approach. As you cover questions on the exam, just use the DIGCIV approach. It's very helpful. Quality management, like I said, you got quality assurance, which is all about process, quality control, all about product. I say quality is fitness for use, conformance to requirements, customer satisfaction, and Kaizen. Moving on to the next area, it's resource. So moving on to resource management, key team members are consistently overworked, leading to burnout and decreased productivity. What should the project manager do next to address this resource issue? You got to do something, project manager. So you have resource planning, acquisition, team development, conflict resolution within the team. All that stuff happens in this knowledge area. And of course, you also have control the physical resources. Communications management, like I said, you have the process of communication in the process domain, but you have the aspect of people in the people domain. So here's a scenario. Stakeholders are expressing frustration over the lack of project updates and transparency. What communication strategy should the project manager have employed to prevent this dissatisfaction? Well, obviously, there's no transparency. So that's a green light as far as what the answer could be. We have communications planning, we distribute information, we report on performance. And of course, stakeholder engagement is woven in here somehow because when you're engaging your stakeholder, you need to communicate with them. So instead of having a compartmentalized, rigid classification siloed for your exam, you got to get to maturity where everything is blended and you see everything as project management, not it's this knowledge area alone, it's that knowledge area. Because when I ask people after the exam, were you able to pinpoint which knowledge area was being asked? The answer is no, I was not. It went in a blur. It was so mixed, I couldn't tell. Risk management. A risk event with significant impact on the project's timeline occurs unexpectedly. What should the project manager do next to mitigate the consequences. So we're not talking about mitigating the risk. We're talking about the consequences, right? So in that regard, you need to choose an option that makes sense. You couldn't have avoided, you couldn't have avoided the risk, and it's too late to escalate. So this is asking you, what are you going to do to reduce the impact? All right. And of course, we have 7 things here, but at a high level, we plan, we identify, we do analysis, we do risk response planning, we implement, and we monitor the risks. Procurement. The vendor delivering a critical component of the project informs you of a delay in delivery due to unforeseen circumstances. What should a project manager do next to address this procurement issue? You got to address it. So don't say, oh, well, it's too late. No, you got to address it. So if you have that mindset of, I got to move the situation forward, I got to do something about it, I'm not going to push it back into people's faces, you'll get questions right. Stakeholder management. Key stakeholders expressed dissatisfaction with the project's progress during a review meeting, citing lack of involvement in decision making. What should the project manager do next to address these stakeholders' concerns? So you can see we have multiple stakeholder scenarios, different, just little nuances of their grief in the different scenarios. This is how your exam is going to be. So we have stakeholder identification analysis, stakeholder engagement planning, stakeholder communication, stakeholder feedback, and expectation management. These are things that we expect to encounter on the exam. At a higher level, getting into the process domain, we talk about agile, hybrid, and predictive. In the world of agile, a scenario could be the development team encounters unforeseen technical challenges during a sprint, impacting the delivery timeline. What should the project manager do next to support the team in resolving these challenges? You could have questions like that. So you need to be familiar with the Agile Manifesto, Scrum, Kanban, coaching in the world of Agile, servant leadership, Agile transformations, and so on. Chapter 6 in the Agile Practice Guide and all the other chapters. Hybrid is all about combining the best of both worlds, right? So imagine a question that says, the project requires both predictive and adaptive approaches due to its complexity and evolving requirements. What should the project management framework should the project manager adopt to ensure successful delivery? So again, you got to have that thinking hat on, carefully read through the scenario and understand what is best to do. Integration of predictive and agile, tailoring and agile practices in a predictive environment, how those could be implemented. Understanding that there are guardrails described in the Agile Practice Guide when you are transitioning into the world of Agile, there are things you could use as a support mechanism. General predictive ideas. The project manager identifies a potential risk related to market fluctuations that could impact project cost. What should the project manager do next to address this predictive risk? So again, if you know the hallmarks of predictive, the rules of the game of predictive, you'll be able to answer stuff like this. Traditional project management techniques, the concept of predictive, waterfall is just one in many in predictive plan and execution strategies, and all that lingo. I very much doubt you'll see the word waterfall on the exam, but just understand that when waterfall came out from the people at Rolls-Royce, they had feedback loops. So it's not good to demonize waterfall by saying, oh, it's all the same and it's predictive. Not entirely, but we'll talk about that on a different day. Let's go to the business domain. In the business domain, imagine a scenario. Understand business context and decision making. As a project manager, you're faced with a decision on selecting a solution that aligns with the organization's strategic goals while maximizing value. What should you consider next? So here, you really need to have a solid idea of the business case, the benefits management plan, the benefits register, the concept of first to market, early value delivery, continuous delivery, cost of delay, agile principles in business decision making. In other words, think like a product owner, think like a product manager as well. Prioritization techniques such as WSJF, cost of delay, value-based prioritization comes in to the discussion. Project compliance and risk management is big. So your project could encounter unforeseen compliance requirements that could impact its success. What approach should you take to address these compliance needs? Well, they're compliance. You don't really have a choice. You can't say, I'm going to ignore them. The PMI wants you to do something about them. So you've got to identify compliance requirements, classify compliance categories, assess threats to compliance, analyze consequences of non-compliance, utilize risk management techniques to address compliance needs, and measure and monitor project compliance throughout the project lifecycle. When it comes to benefits identification and delivery, this is a big one in the business domain. Stakeholders express concerns, for example, about the realization of project benefits. How should you ensure ongoing benefit realization and stakeholder engagement? Investigating and documenting identified benefits is big. The PMI talks about a benefits register and a benefits management plan. This idea is very peculiar to the world of PMI. In the real world, a lot of people in the business should be doing this, but a lot of times no one does it. So you can expect questions about ownership agreement for ongoing benefits realization, measurement systems, appraising stakeholders of value gain progress, and things like that. Adaptation to external business environment changes. You should always be scanning the business environment as a good manager, as a good project manager. So external business environment changes necessitate adjustments to the project scope. How should you prioritize and address these changes effectively? Surveying and assessing changes in the external business environment. What is happening in the world of IT? How is the world of AI affecting your business and things like that? Those are ideas that you should have in the back of your mind for the exam. Prioritizing and recommending scope adjustments. We call that the dynamic scope option in the Agile Practice Guide, continuously monitoring external business environment for impacts on scope, and implementing Agile principles to adapt scope and backlog changes dynamically. When it comes to organizational change management, a scenario could be organizational changes impact project dynamics and stakeholder engagement. What action should you take to support organizational change and project success? So again, my friends, you got to remember what we're doing here. This is mindset conditioning. And the more you listen to this, the less surprises you will have, because you will begin to understand how everything is interwoven. And trust me, your brain is already thinking of how it all comes together. Trust the process. I need you to bookmark this. I need you to like it. I need you to subscribe. And I need you to come back and revisit this video over and over again, because this mindset is lacking in a lot of training. And that's why I'm giving it to you right now. Okay. So you got to be able to assess organizational culture, understand the impact of the organizational change on your project and stakeholders, identifying necessary actions to support organizational change, and implementing change management strategies to ensure project alignment with organizational goals. There is so much to talk about, my friends, but I will talk about a few more points. Business relationships and partnerships. Here's a scenario. Strategic partnerships are essential for project success. How should you cultivate and manage these relationships effectively? You got to identify key business relationships and partnerships, establish effective communication and collaboration channels, leverage partnerships, and resolve conflicts and manage expectations. When it comes to resolving conflict, you also should take note of who is at play: external, internal stakeholder. What is the value that person or those people bring to your firm? Another big part of business is understanding the difference between project management, program management, and portfolio management, and the value delivery system as coined by PMI in the 7th edition. A scenario could be your organization manages multiple projects and initiatives. How should you prioritize projects and ensure value delivery across the portfolio? You got to prioritize projects. You got to implement value delivery system to maximize portfolio value. You got to monitor and adjust portfolio priorities. You got to kill what's ugly, those ugly projects, before they eat you alive. You got to align project portfolios with organizational strategy. That higher level of thinking is very much needed in the business domain, my friends. And so there you have it. We have covered a ton of information today, my friends. And we're at the end of unraveling the PMP exam, mindset, expectations, and ideas. You got to remember, as you cover the content for this exam, the Agile Manifesto values and principles are huge. They are so key, because the questions, when the PMI presents them to you, they are going to have a lot of Agile buried in there. And the best way to get good with Agile is to read the Agile Manifesto values and principles over and over again and ask yourself what they truly mean in the real world. I would also advise you, if you haven't already, go on down to scrumguides.org and read the Scrum Guide. This will help you every step of the way to understand what exactly the questions are talking about under the hood, because a lot of times they do not use the word Scrum Master. So you really need to understand Scrum very well to be able to find the regular suspects in the question and understand the direction. If you are getting ready for the PMP exam, please be aware that I have a course coming up, hpmexam.com. This is where you can get hand-holding and stellar advice for your exam. This is where you will get into the mindset and you will get into real-world concepts that will help you way beyond your PMP. And even after you get certified, there's the Life After the PMP Exam course that you will be automatically enrolled for, and you will be given all the assistance you need to get good in project management, both for the exam and the real world.